Okay, a very good morning to everyone joining us today. I'm Nurul Amira Adriana, a second year child and family psychology student in UMS. Today we will be discussing scholarship and nation building, the dual role of the university. And joining with us today is Dr. Sharifah Munirah Alatas, a lecturer in international relations and associate professor at the Research Center for History, Politics and International Affairs at Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. Dr. Munira earned her BA at the University of Oregon and an MA and her doctorate from Columbia University. Dr. Munira specializes in geopolitics, strategic thought, and foreign policy. Dr. Munira is also an executive committee member of Gerak, the academic movement of Malaysia, and a columnist of Free Malaysia Today, Malaysia Kini, and the Islamabad Policy Research Institute. Recurring themes in her academic and popular writings include West centrism, intellectual imperialism, hegemony, and post colonialism. Welcome, Dr. Munira, to UMS. Even though it's just virtually, it's an honor for us to have you here. Before I continue, would you like to add anything, perhaps something you've been working on these days to preface our conversation today?
Good morning, Amira. Thank you so much for the introduction. And I'd like to also thank Senan, who I met quite some time ago when he had a better head of hair. Yes, I'm pleased to be back with UMS, even though it's virtual. Today's presentation or discussion, I would say, is rather important. And it also adds to my own academic interest, which is currently about how knowledge is produced in the study of international relations. And I found that scholars actually are not capable or less capable in Malaysian universities of critically revisiting critical theories in IR. And so that's my current academic interest that I hope will also help to cast some light on what we discussed today.
Thank you, Doctor. I'm sure all of us are also very excited for the topic today. So, to start off our discussion, I think it's best for us to lay out the foundation for the topic. So, the first question is, how would you define the purpose of higher education and how the academic culture is like, especially in the 21st century?
All right. Defining or laying out the foundation of the crisis that we are facing, I would say I should focus on three main issues. First of all, we need to be really clear in our minds what is the responsibility of the university, okay? What's the purpose of a university? Secondly, we talk a lot about critical thinking, how we need to create graduates who are critical thinkers. We need to also have a clear understanding of what critical thinking is and why critical thinking does not connect with indoctrination. Okay, I'll get back to that point later. We also need to bring back the third point, I would say. We need to bring back the discussion about nourishing the mind and the soul and to de-link the obsession of the university with politicians, politics, politicking, career, and the economy. So we need to move away from that discussion, at least I hope, during this next hour. If we can focus on nourishing the mind and soul, because this is the narrative or the discourse that we have been neglecting. So if I may just mention, just give me 2 more minutes for this first point. In this whole discussion or the different approach of speaking about nourishing the mind and soul, we need to focus on scholarship, academic integrity, honesty, and the larger philosophical question of developing a soulful, spiritual human being. Now, spiritual does not mean religious, okay? So I'm sure everyone understands that. So soulful, spiritual human being and be aware of what the meaning of life is. It's not I apologize, or I feel sorry for people who think that I am sitting in the clouds when I say this, but when it comes to nation building, when you try to analyze why we are failing in many aspects of nation building, it takes us back to this issue of spirituality, of honesty, of whether we know what the meaning of our life is within society. Okay, I think I don't want to start off by confusing everyone, but I hope I hope that's clear.
Yeah, I think the thing about nation building, oftentimes people don't really look at the philosophical like side of it. Most people think that, oh, if you're smart, then you can build a nation, just like that. And they don't really think about the humanities aspect of it. So just now you also mentioned about the responsibilities. So as someone who has been a student in university and now also being a lecturer in a university, how would you say that the responsibilities of universities and the people working for the universities have shifted? Have you seen any differences, and how has that kind of impacted how you view the institution as a whole?
Okay, to address this question of responsibilities of the university and the professors included, um, we need to actually be aware that the role of the universities globally, not just in Malaysia, has shifted, and not just shifted over the years, but in fact shifted over the centuries, I would say. Um, we have, first of all, to address that, we need to be aware of the origin of the university. We know that the first university, all of us know that the first universities emerged in Europe around the 11th century. They were known as universitas, from the Latin word.
Mm.
But in the 10th century, just some 100 years before that, we already had a group of a community of scholars outside of Europe who had already emerged, not in the form of an institutionalized form of university, but a community of thinkers and scholars who emerged from the madrasas and the mosques. Uh,
Mm.
so we already had that system of thinking about the bigger picture and the big philosophical questions about why society seems to be regressing, or how can we succeed more in what we have achieved so far. Um, Now, as I said, this was not institutionalized, but it was only done so in an institutionalized manner in the 11th century in Bologna, where you have the first so-called university that we have now all inherited. But going back to this community of scholars in the Muslim world, uh, I think we have shifted or deviated from this very um, excellent way of approaching education, which is transdisciplinary. Um,
Mm.
these community of scholars partook in what I would call epistemological balance in their approach to education. So they would study chemistry, geography, literature, music, physics. They would consider these combination of subjects very relevant to everything they do in life. Whereas it's quite different with students today. And the way university departments are organized today, it is far from being transdisciplinary or far from being epistemologically balanced. I'm sure there'll be questions later, but I think you get the idea of being transdisciplinary. So, origin of the universities and how it has deviated. This is the problem. Maybe we will address. I can address that later because of the events in history that took place after the 11th century. But I hope this is good enough to address your second question,
Uh,
Amira.
Truly, I think that's the thing with universities now, is that there's not a lot of, people would say, a variety in what you study. If you're a science student, then that's all you're going to be studying. Because I also come from a science background, so what I've been studying is only just science. I
Mm.
have this interest in humanities, but I can't really do it aside from science because they don't allow it, especially in Malaysia. It's only now that I'm starting to venture out towards what I'm passionate about, but also trying to keep my interest in science alive. And like you said, that's, I think, also one of the things that's kind of lacking in the Malaysian education system, how there's no such thing as transdisciplinary. And the only classes that I have that are not psychology are the classes that I took during my first year, like my classes with Sir in universal human rights, gender and society, and the linguistics. And after that, it's only just psychology, and there's no other thing than that. And it really kind of makes me feel, oh, I'm not really using a lot of my brain power when I'm just trying to focus on just one thing without venturing out to like the other sections of education. And I kind of feel kind of restricted, even though it's not. But since a lot of times I just have to focus on psychology, or a lot of times when I was younger, I only have to focus on science, I didn't really have the time to learn about things. And after finishing science, then I realized that, oh, I'm missing out on so much in feeding my soul when I don't actually study humanities and arts and all of that stuff. And I wish that, the Malaysian system, education system, would realize that this is what gonna help um, build their actual philosophical of education.
Amira, I'm so happy to hear you, a young second-year student, saying that, because the more of you who do feel that way, um, we need to encourage, we meaning the lecturers who also feel that way, including Sir, um, we need to encourage and draw it out of the students as to whether they feel nourished mentally, intellectually, and spiritually being in the university. And I can tell you, after the decades I've been at this in the system, um, on the one hand, we don't feel that about the students. They don't let us know that this is lacking. And on the other hand, maybe they are afraid to approach us. They are afraid to voice their opinions. It's a combination of two of it, because as we know, that there's hardly much freedom allocated for discourse on campus, either among the students or among the lecturers themselves. But this is a problem, and well, I think you may have some more other issues to raise, so I'll let you proceed, Amira.
Yeah, I think that's just kind of like the essence of it. I think it's not really subtle, but when being in class and now being at home, now that it's kind of like rising to the surface that, oh, something is not fulfilling for me. Things like that when it comes to education, especially during my first year, I was very kind of excited to go for classes because, oh, I'm also learning social sciences and I'm also learning universal human rights. And it's just a combination of things that I'm really excited about. And it's just kind of very important for me to constantly have brain stimulation, if I can say that. And just now I also mentioned about how the Malaysian education system doesn't really realize that having this well-balanced transdisciplinary sort of education actually goes hand in hand with the philosophy of education that we have in Malaysia that people often don't really know about. If you ask them, what's the philosophy of education in Malaysia? No one really knows, and probably maybe no one actually tells them what it is. So um, the question is like, you
Uh,
mentioned about how, yeah?
Amira, sorry to interrupt. Actually, Malaysia's higher education or education philosophy exists.
Yeah.
Okay. it is extremely good, in my opinion. We have a very good philosophy which is typed out in the website, and it's wonderful. But you're right, we are not aware of it. It's not drummed into us, or it's not exposed in the form of as part of our curriculum, as part of when we engage students and when we teach them. I mean, for instance, part of what I am discussing with you today, this morning, embodies an aspect of that philosophy of education. So this is my attempt to introduce you all to it. But you know, it can't just be one person out of the tens of thousands of lecturers who exist who don't do it. So we have an excellent philosophy of education. And the problem that you have expressed about not being able to grasp transdisciplinary courses, this problem goes back to the mid-19th century, in fact, in England, in Britain. And let me just talk briefly about this one individual, an intellectual, a thinker, who happened to also be a priest, a Catholic priest, an Anglican, I would say. He has since been made a saint, but his name, Cardinal John Henry Newman, and he wrote in the 1850s. And basically, he was very upset, very critical, and very depressed about the way the education and the universities were developing. And this was during the time of of colonialism, industrial revolution. So there was a lot of social change going on. There was also the horrors of colonialism that was going on. So this prompted him to decide that education has developed a very immoral, unethical society. So there's, you know, he does refer to Catholicism a lot, but the message that he has written is very pertinent to the change and the regression that we are feeling and experiencing today. I would suggest his books or his writings, his speeches, be part of our curriculum here. But just because he's a cardinal and now a saint and a Catholic, it may not be included. But the very reason I'm talking about it is because we have a similar situation in the mid-19th century, parallel to what is going on today. But we are unable to critically connect the dots between that period of time and now, and how we are experiencing the same, well, what would I say, the same crisis. And we are still unable to solve what's wrong with our education, what's wrong with our universities. We don't really talk about ethics and morality, ethics in publication, ethics in teaching. There's a lot to talk about, but we also only focus on what acts to tweak, what policies to substitute, and that's not good enough. It's too superficial.
True. I think it's just very surface level to just, oh, I'm taking this and they should allow you to do this. But then again, there's so much more to it than just changing the policy. And yeah. And so just now you also mentioned about the philosophy of education. And you've also mentioned about how this is parallel to the mid-19th century, the education system in Britain. And would you say that, no, not would you say, and how does this concept of higher education today, that we have today, that you've mentioned, represent a continuation or a break, or maybe contradict with the philosophy of education that we have had, that we say that not a lot of people are aware of? And how would this affect education, not just in Malaysia, but also globally?
Okay. I think this actually involves more of a discussion about the business of education now. we have today become a very specialized society, and even in universities, what courses we choose, the disciplines we decide to specialize in as lecturers are very specialized and are very narrow. I'm not saying this is not good, but I also think there is an exaggeration of it. So basically, modern education today, in my opinion, we are engrossed and embroiled in the logic of what's the word? The logic of economics. Essentially, that's the logic behind our education and higher education. For instance, we use words such as knowledge, yes, but most of the time we're saying data. We speak about students, but then we also refer to the collective of students as human capital. We talk about getting an education for your financial well-being, but it should be human well-being, because an education you need to create a viable human being who then can decide to make a living.
Mm.
Now we just focus on the financial well-being. And then the curriculum, for instance, that we are given to teach you guys, we must always, always have that link with economic purpose of what is the economic value? How will the students feel that it is pertinent for their economic value? This economic utilitarianism is the wrong ethos that has developed. And that's why I say we are, regressing since the mid-19th century, as Cardinal Newman has mentioned. The cost of education has skyrocketed, yet the cost of food remains affordable. I mean, can you see the comparison? And yet the demand for education, which is so expensive, is there. It makes no sense. It's illogical. But this method or this mode of thinking has already been set in place by the powerful, developed North, countries in Europe and the US. Not all that they say and they push is bad for us, but there are aspects which we have to reject. And this includes, since we're talking about the business of education, it includes the ranking system. And I think Senan, who's listening, is very aware of how oppressive it is.
I used to work in the British Council. Even the British Council doesn't accept rankings, so I don't know why the British Council is responsible for promoting all British universities, and even they themselves cannot they cannot say no, this is number one, that is number two, because they know different departments are different. So even the organization responsible for promoting British education doesn't accept the rankings. So I don't know why.
There's a short circuit in thinking here.
Yeah, so the thing about ranking, oftentimes when people want to go to universities, often they would look at the rankings and see, oh, Oxford, Harvard, and all of that. But oftentimes it doesn't really reflect maybe the quality of education and things like that. Because a friend of mine who's currently studying in the States, currently studying journalism, they often tell me about how, even though the ranking of this school is really high, doesn't really allow students to think freely. They don't always allow school for your students to actually criticize something and all of that. But with their school, I've noticed is that that's the thing I have with like universities romanticizing it. My expectations going to universities is because of my friend, because with their university, the college they're in, they always have these talks. They always have they always allow students to integrate themselves in how they think the university should be like. What rules can be amended to help the students in there, and even their curriculum, even their syllabus is very diverse. Like even though they're taking journalism, they also have to take all the diversity courses and all of that. So when I went into university, I was expecting like, oh, this is so interesting. I get to learn all of these things. But
Yeah.
then the
Mira,
system.
if I may interrupt, I'm sorry. You see, you're absolutely right. First, I need to pick up from the point that you mentioned about freedom to think. Academic freedom, which is now prided in the West, I envy that. You know, not everything about the global North is wrong, and we need to tap on the good things about the West and adopt it here. And one of this is academic freedom, the ability to engage in free discourse on campus, the ability to read widely and read anything. There's no need to ban books. Access to articles, you know, we need access. It shouldn't be so expensive. This is not solely the fault of our countries. I mean, it's also a hegemonic control by the West, controlling knowledge distribution. But the point is, we also have our own ingrown or homegrown problems with it, and mainly that is thought control. You know, we have a system where those in power are not comfortable with granting such academic freedom, and students need that exposure. You need to ask difficult questions. You know, universities are not places to go to be babysat. Students have to be challenged. Students also need to challenge the lecturers. Knowledge is not easy. You need to be to face difficulties intellectually in universities. You shouldn't be pampered. And academic freedom allows for that lack of pampering. I hope you can get that, the
Yeah.
nuance I'm trying to say. Because you have academic freedom, life is difficult in the university. When you put a lid on academic freedom, life on campus becomes easier, simple, pampered. And that's the wrong approach. Okay, I hope everyone who is still a student listening in will understand what I'm saying.
If anyone has questions, you can put the question in the chat box and we can go through it as we discuss. You can just, yeah. Yeah, I think the thing about academic freedom is that I've never realized that we did not, or at least we lack academic freedom until going into university. Knowing that, oh, some books are restricted, or you can't read that because it's against what is being put in Malaysia. And you can't talk about that because you just can't talk about that. It's wrong to speak about that in Malaysia. And the thing with the lack of academic freedom, I think, is that there's also lecturers not being able to have academic discourse, not being able to have creative discourse in classes to talk about things, to think outside the box. Whenever students in class, lecturers in class, they teach, and that's all they do. I'm not sure. It could be that they're not allowed to, or they're scared to, or they just don't want to. But I feel like it's one of the things that is critical, especially going into uni and you expect like things to be challenging you mentally, not mentally like challenging that way, but to make you think like, oh, why is this happening? Why is this going like this? But no, you're just like, okay, take this, that's it, done for the day, like that.
Well, you know, Amira, you're right. Many lecturers feel frustrated. Many have stopped talking. On the other hand, there are also many who can't be bothered, who are intellectually lembab. so, we have a combination. We have many who are frustrated and who are demoralized because of the situation, and who just teach because that's what they're supposed to do, and they follow their KPI requirements, which is also a source of anxiety. But there is hardly any love for the job. Then there are some of us who tend to engage society more, which I feel is the role of the university. You see, universities are meant to be neutral in the sense that we are a platform for open discourse, to give that freedom of choice to the student and the academic to decide what knowledge eventually is relevant for their life and their role in society. So I go back to my point. Universities are neutral grounds, neutral platforms, but in countries around the developing world, including our own, universities has ceased to be neutral platforms or neutral arenas where discourses can take place. So it has contributed to a sort of static, a lack of change that is taking place in society. We can't keep up. We keep going backwards. And then when we feel that we are regressing, we don't have that critical power or the power of intellectual creativity to move away from superficial explanations that it's because we're not religious enough, or because we have a racial problem. So we're connecting the wrong dots. I hope it's clear what I've said, and if not, I can clarify later.
Yeah, I think that's the thing with learning. People often think that learning is just learning, but the process of learning is also unlearning certain things and then relearning new things and to be put into how you carry on with life. But with how it is now, it's just like I'm continuously learning. People just keep on saying, okay, learn new things, learn new things, learn new things. But they don't tell you that, this is not suitable for now. You should unlearn it. And you have to relearn this thing that is more suitable for the society now. I think that's something that's kind of um, lacking in a sense. Yeah. And staying away from academic discourse, just like you said, and some lecturers feeling frustrated. I've heard of this one lecturer, like, for example, the syllabus that are needed in universities, like the philosophy classes, the penghayatan etika dan peradaban. Those courses as known
I
is
tengah webinar, nanti putus. You WhatsApp je. Yang Dr. Simon tu. Okay.
Oops.
oh no, where was I? What was I talking about?
But peradaban etika.
Those kind of those courses are important to us, but oftentimes the lecturers don't have the freedom to conduct the classes how they want to, which part they think are crucial for the students to learn. Because even though university should be neutral, they're still kind of government sanctioned. It's still a place of, a political field. So the ministry would give them, right, the course syllabus. Okay, you have to teach this. Even if you don't agree with what's in the syllabus, you just have to teach this. And a lecturer of mine have also kind of said that even though I don't agree with some of these things that are being put in the syllabus, I have no choice but to teach you guys what I've been told to teach you guys.
Let me give you an example of my growing up. Okay, I went to school in Singapore, but anyway, as a young girl, I have an older brother. He's 2 years older than I am, and there are three of us, but our sister is a lot younger. So when I was 5 and he was 7, my father was a professor as well at NUS. The academic actually has a life within the building of the university, but it doesn't stop there. And that's what I learned, you know, as a young girl growing up in an academic household. Academia or academe or an academic life doesn't stop after you leave campus. So while growing up, regularly my father would have groups of students gathered in our home, 12, sometimes 15 students sitting in a circle in the living room, discussing anything and everything. Nothing, sometimes not everything is related to their particular major or like course of study. So, you know, this is another form of education where if you have restraints on campus because of, political interference, there are other ways. And by having a discussion with your professor off campus, it doesn't mean you are creating a revolutionary movement. I mean, you're just assigning reading material. If you can't assign Das Kapital, which is written by Marx, because it's supposedly controversial and a communist and all that, meet your students on a Saturday and discuss chapters in Das Kapital at home. I mean, of course, you are not talking about a communist insurrection. After all, we celebrate Labor Day, don't we? And Karl Marx is responsible for that. So, you know, there's a lot of contradiction in this. But my point is, if a professor is very concerned about student development, we have to go that extra mile. And I think many of us are trying to do it. But again, there is that majority lot who are not doing it. And this is the tragedy. And this is what is setting back our quality of the universities.
True. And going back into critical thinking again, we talk about how critical thinking is important, especially in universities, and not allowing people to think critically is detrimental, especially to the human soul, or just to the university as a whole. And my question is, why is it necessary for students to be able to think critically, and how detrimental can the lack of critical thinking in universities be to nation building, especially?
Okay, you know, just step back and let's not be so fancy. What is it to be human? Okay, to be human is to be curious, right? To be curious about your surroundings. To be a critical thinker means you are exercising that curiosity. You need to present arguments. You need to receive counter arguments. Engaging in critical thinking is a process of exploration. All right, it's a process of exploration because we are curious about finding the truth about anything and everything. I mean, that's the fundamental tenet of being a human being. So, you know, that's what I mentioned about Andalusia or the early Muslim group of scholars, community of scholars. This is between the 8th and 14th or 15th centuries. Andalusia is a region in Spain, okay, Muslim Spain. Now, this is what prompted this community of scholars to emerge. Basic curiosity about their surroundings, and the need to debate and discuss with one another as to unfolding why there are problems or why there's too much success, you know, because to fulfill the basic human need. I think this is extremely crucial for nation building because what is nation building? Nation building consists of human beings, isn't it? I mean, it's as easy as that. We don't need to use big theoretical terms or conceptual ideas that confuse people. Basically, nation building is about people who interact with each other, who don't always get along with each other, but let's sit down and be critical and argue and receive counter arguments as to how to improve the situation. But of course, in a country like Malaysia, you have a lot of problems with leadership, and because the universities do not have enough autonomy to help out in this process. So, we're sort of in a deadlock, but we need more discussions like we're having this morning, I think. I hope it will happen among the young people, at least. Forget about us oldies, it's gone. I think we're all set in our ways.
Yeah,
I think, Melissa, there's a number of comments in the chat box.
yeah. People are discussing as well in the chat box. They're having a discourse.
Maybe we take some comments or questions from the chat box. Maybe Prof. Munirah would like to respond.
There's one. Can you also comment on the students at the graduate level versus undergraduate and compare your experience at Columbia versus locally? In the United States, before embarking on research on your doctoral pursuit, you must take a broad areas of courses.
That's an excellent question, and I don't know if my answer is appropriate in 2021, because when I was a student, it was in the 1980s. From what I'm told, the students of Columbia today are somewhat similar everywhere else, meaning a lack of attention to critical thinking. But no, let's answer the question, which is very important. My experience has been extremely different compared to what I have been going through teaching in Malaysia. As a student in the 1980s, it was wonderful. First of all, the campus culture was completely different from what I experience today and what I think what students experience today. Of course, given the weather is different, so it's easy to sit outside under a tree and engage in discourse with your professor and have a good time or a picnic. I'm not suggesting that what you see on TV, okay? What I'm suggesting is we experience any nook and cranny on campus. We would sit, we would pick up from the last point of a lecture. And trust me, I took organic chemistry. I was supposed to have a combination of science and social science courses. I took organic chemistry. Now, I couldn't grasp it, but there was an aspect of it that I picked up from the last lecture. I got together with a group of students. We sat in a small corner outside a building, and the discussion became very philosophical. There was a connection made to organic chemistry and philosophy. It stuck in my mind. Now, I don't want to get into it because I think I may have forgotten a lot about it. But believe me, this sort of thing I don't think happens on campus here. Now, when I was teaching at Columbia, I was a research assistant in the history department. Again, the climate was different. The culture, the academic culture there is quite different. Outside somebody's office, you can stand there for 2 hours, stand in the corridor, literally, and talk about many things. It doesn't happen here. And for the last 20 years, I've been at my university. Everyone is doing their own thing, shut in their rooms, clock in, which is another thing I resent, because it it cancels out that whole culture of intellectual freedom and flexibility. They clock in, lock themselves in the room, clock out. So it's become a business, a company that we go to. So I think we have lost that academic culture. And my experience at Columbia was quite different. And I don't think you can find that here. So whoever asked the question, what you see on TV with relationship to campus life, there's some truth to it, at least when I was going there. And to some extent, maybe it still exists. But it is quite rare to find in a Malaysian campus. Senan, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe I'm totally have a misconception, but I think you would agree with me there.
I would say that whether it's students or lecturers, everybody needs to be encouraged to think. This idea of small groups and get people to test out their own ideas. People are not confident. Malaysians are very unconfident. I don't know whether it's Malaysians, but maybe I live in Sabah, so it's a very community organized system. So people don't want to be, the tall poppy gets cut off or something. There's an English saying. So people don't want to be too vocal. It has its good points when you're talking about interethnic relations, but then when you want in a university setting, it's not very suitable.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up about the confidence issue. And we can't, again, I said we are a Band-Aid culture. Band-Aid meaning plaster that you put on a wound. We are a Band-Aid culture because we believe in fixing problems along the way without going back to the original, the source. The source of this problem of lack of confidence is from kindergarten. It's from, well, okay, yes, actually kindergarten, primary, secondary school. All of you go through that system of you listen to the authority, you are told what to read, told when to ask a question, or even probably scolded for asking a question that the teacher might find a bit difficult to answer because of his or her insecurity. So they may scold you for saying that's not a right question, you shouldn't ask it. I find that exists in a lot of our some of our lecturers too. Because they are not sure of themselves, they take it out on the student. Don't ask such a question. You're being, insubordinate. So confidence is a big part of experiencing an academic culture and being a good academic on campus and a good researcher also.
Yeah, that's one thing to like think about how people don't have confidence. I think that's the thing with me, especially growing up. My father was very he told me to always study, gain knowledge, always be curious about the things. So growing up, I would always like ask questions in class and all of that. But then teachers would sometimes shut me down, like not take my questions because I asked too much, or maybe I'm just challenging them. They don't want to answer. And ever since that, I've been kind of, I tend to shy away from asking or speaking up in class because I feel like, oh, what if they shut me down again? What if I'm asking something that's not relevant? What if they don't think it's a good question? What if they feel like I'm challenging them? Things like that. And I think that's kind of sad because I often compare my friend in the States, how they're studying and how I'm studying in the university, and it's very different. And it's how they're always like you said, you would have discourse, gather together and discuss, and sometimes professors would do extra classes just to be able to make you understand better or have you talk to them about things you're not sure about. But here, as far as I remember, we don't really have that because just like Sir mentioned how some people are not confident, some people are scared to be too vocal. And wait, let me go through the chat again. There is a question about how
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether I could bring in some. There's lots of chats going on now. Can I maybe bring in some of the people to voice their opinions? I think Melissa, Dr. Balvinda, Dr. Shariza, An Alija Nazwa. Some of you are already deep in discussion. So maybe if you could have your views on some of the things that Nurul, Amira, and Prof. Munirah has said. Maybe you can unmute yourself. Go ahead, anyone.
Hi, Dr. Sanan. May I say something?
Go ahead, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Sharifah Munirah. Okay, it's very, very interesting, and it's very mind-opening. And Amira, you're very good. Okay, so it's just, I'm not going to ask you a question. It's just I'd like to share. Okay, my experience. Okay, Alhamdulillah, I came from quite a good family, so we can afford to send. Okay, I was sent to very good school in primary and secondary. And then when I came to UMS, I am so sorry to say that I was shocked to see that the students, the students were not, they prefer to listen to you, whatever you say. You know, they do not have this inquisitive mind. And also, I think I put it to the education system. Okay, because the school that I went to, we were empowered even when I was in primary, when I was in secondary. So let's say, for example, yeah, how the teacher empowered us. Okay, we do not have okay, I came from Malay background, yeah, Malay Bahasa Malaysia, but it was a good boarding school. So let's say, for example, every 2 weeks we will have like English week, and then we will have drama. The teacher will never, okay, the teacher did not dictate what to do. We are the one who were the script writers, we were the actors, we were everything. The teacher just sit there and watch what we are doing. So I think, so I learned from that. I learned a lot from the upbringing in the school, okay? And then when I joined UMS, sadly, the students were not empowered, not that much. I mean, some of them very active, but most are not active. So I put it down that it goes back to the education system. I might be wrong. So I would like to hear your comment, Dr. Sharifah. I think you have commented some of this earlier on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Yes, of course, it goes back to the education. And, you know, I would just like to speak a little about the teachers and parents. Now, we also cannot blame the teachers, and poor things, they struggle through it too. I think we need to address why we talk so much about reforming the education system, yet we are very blasé and very removed, superficial about retraining our teachers. This is a very important component if we want to transform the whole education ethos in our country. We cannot keep blaming the schools, because ultimately, indirectly, we end up blaming the teachers, and it's not their fault. At the same time, we need more interaction with the parents. Yes, I know that parents and schools have organizations and they associate with each other in terms of communicate. But what about at the university level? We also need to bring in more discussion and community or communication with parents, because after all, parents are sending students to the university as well. Undergraduates are not, you know, just after high school, they're not suddenly on their own. So, you know, this whole holistic approach to revamping our education has to involve many stakeholders, and this includes the parents, it includes the teachers, it includes us, lecturers on campus, young people, but civil society organizations. And I know it's being done, but we are not addressing the appropriate problems. And part of what I talked about today is a big chunk of what we are not addressing. It's our outlook on life, on society, how we have prioritized the economic aspects of education, and that's it. And yet, the contradiction is we pride ourselves in being officially a Muslim country. We use religion as our foundation of national identity, yet we are not talking about the human being. So let's look at the contradictions, and this is part of critical thinking, by the way. Look at these contradictions and approach a closer road or a brighter road to some kind of transformation. I hope I answered or commented enough to satisfy you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the input. And I think that's the thing, like you mentioned about human capital earlier, how everything is just very business oriented. And that's something I wanted to go in about academic capitalism, the effects of capitalism, especially in academia, and how this has turned intellectualism to become more business oriented, whether or not it's marketable. And a lot of education has been put in that sense, kind of like economic assets, like units. If you're not marketable, then I'm not gonna put enough attention for you. And I feel like this way, the effects of capitalism, especially in academia, has changed, redefined what knowledge is really about. It has kind of shaped scholarship in a way that we, in a more business-oriented way. So, the question is like, what is knowledge really about? And why have certain subjects been treated as irrelevant over the years, especially with academic capitalism, just like you mentioned about universities emphasizing you maybe becoming human capital instead of human being.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think this part of the conversation it goes back to what I mentioned earlier about the ethos of our universities. Okay. Now let's go back to the ethos of these universities in Europe. All right. During the Industrial Revolution, right into colonialism, and then immediately after both the world wars.
Mm.
The US but mainly countries in Europe, after two world wars, devastation, society needed to reset, nations needed to be rebuilt. Okay. So these countries in Europe, recovering from the conflict of World War I and II, they looked at their centers of learning, their universities, to rebuild their societies. Let's not forget, though, intellectuals also helped in the war effort. We have intellectuals, theoretical physicists like Oppenheimer, who created the atomic bomb, which was used in World War II. So, I mean, they were still active, and there were universities who were behind the war effort. But when, after the destruction of World War II, they needed to rebuild their societies. The focus of universities then drastically shifted, which is what we have inherited today. Okay, their centers of learning, they took pride in pushing the national university. So Germany, recovering from World War II, now is proud of creating a German center of learning, a German university, the Frankfurt School of Thought. You have many different schools of thought emerging in sociology, in history, in international relations. So these were attributed to national identities like Germany, England. Then you have the Chicago School. So intellectual development mushroomed as part of nation building of European countries. But it was exported here, the idea of turning this recovery and development into something global. So then we developed this notion of classifying universities. We have a world-class university. We have the concept of ranking universities. But my question is, just because Europe went through World War I and World War II, including we did too, but on a different level, what makes us define what is world class? In the ranking system, we have a society in Europe, which is one type of society. We have a Southeast Asian society, which is a different type, another type. Not all countries suffered under World War I and II. I mean, there are many societies that didn't, who only experienced peripheral effects of it. So what is world-class about global world ranking systems? Yet we are imposed, it is imposed upon us through this business ethos. Part of the reparation in Europe is to also turn education into economics. It's a way to generate the economy. Now, I haven't studied this in depth because we need the input of economists in this matter. And there are many in Malaysia doing it, but we need more synthesis of all the different knowledges that are being done to synthesize it into our discourse about transforming our education culture and philosophy and quality. I don't know if I've gone around the bush in answering your question, but business ethos of education has developed for decades, actually. It's not just since the 90s or the year 2000s.
Yeah, I think another approach to like whether or not you're marketable is when, as a student, when you want to choose a major you want to major in, the first thing people would ask is, are you gonna make money out of what you're gonna learn? And that's the thing again with me being a science student. People would say, why not just go for medic? You generate more money. You're going to psychology, you won't be able to, you're not going to be marketable. People will say that to me.
Okay, young people, all of you, you must realize, okay, and I think there are others in Malaysia who can put this more succinctly than I can. Companies don't really look for your, okay, rather than put it that way, companies are looking for more in you. Specifically, are you good in your own skin? Are you confident? Are you able to communicate? They're not going to test you whether you know a certain engineering problem or not at the interview, for instance. So studying a discipline, getting a degree in a discipline in the university, it could be philosophy, but you may decide to apply to an architecture company. Now, again, it's a holistic change in our attitude towards what our society should be, how the economy should fit in with society. I don't say the other way around, how society should fit in with the economy. This whole ethos has to change. But basically, what's wrong in an architecture company hiring a philosophy major? There is quite an acute connection between philosophy and architecture. Now, employers should see that. If the employer is educated in a more liberal arts, more interdisciplinary manner, they would be able to see that. So I hope I'm being relevant here, and I think that's the message that needs to be spread.
True. And the thing about connections, I think people tend to ignore that. People think that, oh, this subject and this subject totally separate. There's no connections between all the subjects. But as I was learning, I'm noticing, oh wait, there's so many connections to be made. There are connections between this subject and this subject, even though people feel like they are totally separate. And people often not want to acknowledge that, maybe. And it's just really sad to think about when people think that you having this kind of, you being in this disciplinary, you can only go down that path. And I think it's very restricting.
Maybe I could add to that. If you don't mind, Amira, maybe I could just add to that. You know, when I was in Portland for my Fulbright scholarship, I used to attend neighborhood meetings in the place where I lived. The architects used to come and talk to the neighborhood when they want to cut down a tree, you know. But you know, our society is not built like that. So that's why our universities don't call the architects to come to liberal arts to learn about, you know, environmental conservation. So it's a catch-22 problem, lah. Dr. Munirah, what do you say?
Yes, it's catch-22, but you know, I'm sitting or standing on one side of this problem because I'm an academic and on campus. I think many of us in academia, we need to keep this narrative, this discourse alive. You know, before we came online, you know, as you and I were talking, and I said that I'm going off tangent a little about what is usually discussed about our education reform. I don't want to talk about the acts and the specific policy oriented problems that we are facing. Not many of us are addressing problems of the environment and why we need to include it in our engineering courses or courses on political science. We don't have that, you know. To some extent, we used to have it in IR, but you know, in my university, we don't teach undergraduates in IR anymore. So this is a problem. Bridging the gap is you and I, Senan. We're going to have to keep talking about it, and many other academics will need to engage the students, write publicly. You know, I do it. I have a few columns. I do write in the media, but I think more of us should be doing it, including the students. Yes, we're all busy. We all have no time, but really, if you are serious, you would save that 1 hour going to the mama shop to eat and spend that writing a column. You know, it sounds harsh and it sounds like I'm, you know, yeah, being harsh, but really, what is the other way? Because we keep talking in circles and coming up against the same wall, not addressing the fundamental problems. And we need more involvement of the universities in society. And right now, it's very separate. Even what academics write in terms of their articles and books, many are so irrelevant for society. Yet they get their KPIs and they do get promoted. They become full professors or emeriti. But how does this trickle down to usefulness for society, which eventually will affect young people like Amira and the rest?
I think we have to take go to our Q&A. Maybe Amira, you can invite some questions, or maybe I encourage them to ask directly.
Sure. There's
Yeah.
also a question in the chat box. I think there's two, but most of it are discussions. But there's one. Can you comment on the role of religious, that is Islamic, education in making students not inclined to ask questions? Much of Islamic education in Malaysia is indoctrination.
Okay. Yeah, I would prefer not to comment directly on religion, but I would like to comment on the indoctrination part, because religion is just part of the indoctrination environment that we all live under. And in Malaysia, of course, politics has used religion a lot to indoctrinate and to actually spread lies about religion. There are many aspects of religion that encourage debate, encourage reading different sources of knowledge. In fact, I listened to Professor Osman Bakar's talk yesterday or day before yesterday at Assoc. And he spoke about Al-Ghazali and his approach to knowledge. In Islam, for instance, there is encouragement to know every level of knowledge from every corner of the world. So this process of indoctrination and preventing certain parts of our community from reading certain things, from banning books, punishment if you do so, being fined or arrested, put in jail. In my opinion, this is wrong, because it is only wrong because you are imposing another point of view on someone, which is equally wrong. So there is no place for indoctrination in the university. As I said, indoctrination, or rather the university, is meant to be a space, a neutral space for discussion and discourse. Once you get out of the university, if you want to indoctrinate yourself or be indoctrinated in society, go ahead. But don't use the university for that. That's my answer. I hope it helped.
There's also another question from just now. Wait, I need to scroll through. Where is it? Why are most of our students timid? They hardly open their mouths in tutorial apart from yawning.
Okay, a good question, but can I please ask this person who asked the question to please ask it in person?
I think it's Miss Sarija.
Hi, it's me again, Sharija. I'm a law lecturer at the Faculty of Business and Economics. So I was the one who asked the question. It's just that because, law subjects are compulsory to most business students, but they're elective also. But when it comes to elective subject, most of them, they will try to shun away from my course because they think that it's very difficult. They don't want to read a lot and so forth. But through experience, most of them did not take part, no matter how hard I tried to encourage them. But normally I use Padlet. Okay, then they will write something. Okay, and I tried to emulate what my professors in the UK did by not trying to label the students as stupid or that's not a good question and so forth. Because I remember when I was in the UK, my professors will always say, "Oh, that's a very good question." No, actually, I think that's very stupid to me. But I mean, but they try to encourage me, Malaysian student, from Malay background, to share or to talk in the class, and I find that's very, I think, it's very helpful. So that I talk in the tutorial.
Sorry to interrupt. Okay, I understand completely what you're saying. All right, I won't, get more. I don't need more details from you. But what about the syllabus? Okay, this is what I do. I've noticed it too, of course. You know, I'm close to retirement, so I've spent a long time with this and suffered because of it. But I finally decided I will alter my syllabus. So now I dedicate a lot more percentage, higher percentage, to class participation. It's harder, okay? It's harder to conduct a class that way because there's a lot more you have to engage with. Plus, there's a lot more I have to read and prepare for if I'm going to make students participate. Also make them read something, present it in class in the form of a dialogue, like we are engaging in this morning. You ask one question to them, unless they respond, they're not going to be graded well. So, you know, I think these are some of the ways we can change the culture. But ultimately, it goes back to high school and primary school and the parents. So I don't know how to help once these students get to see us in the university. Again, it's teachers. We need to tell the teachers that they are supposed to engage their 5 and 6 year olds or 6 and 7 year olds onwards. This kind of culture has to change and has to start from young. So I'm sorry, I have no solution. Sharia, is that your name, Shari? Yeah, so sorry if I couldn't answer your question.
Actually, I agree with your answer because it boils back to your background, okay? Whether your parents read storybook, bedtime storybooks to you or not before you go to sleep, or they just simply let you watch the TV.
Correct. Yes, and that's why parents are a very important, I'm going to use a business metaphor, stakeholder in this whole issue. Parents are very important. So we cannot leave them out. And people like us who are academics, if we want to address this problem of education, we need to constantly refer to the role of the parent, because I feel we tend to neglect it. We tend to neglect that a lot. And next thing that we neglect is also the teachers, or the re-education of teachers, the retraining, sorry, not really education, but the retraining of teachers. Thank you.
If anyone else has any questions, you can.
Can I intervene? Aziz, my name is Aziz. I've been listening, but I think basically it is indeed much more problematic if you look at the structure as a whole. To me, it is a structural problem. You did touch a bit. If you go through the education system in Japan, for example, you know how kindergarten system of education is so empowering. You see, the small kids learn how to respect the elders, cuci pinggan, cuci mangkuk. You know, the amalan is a practice. But for us, this is not done. If you do that in Malaysia, for example, you probably get beating by the parents. Well, how can you treat my children like this? So basically, it is structural. If we want to, and also you talk about the parents. The parents were taught by that same system. You cannot get them to be engaged. They are not empowered. They have never been exposed to the system that that we need to do. So I suggest sit down with the ministry, with the people who make the policies. Look, we have to get our system correct structurally. Kindergarten should be like this, and up to the level of the university. Then you get people at the end of the day, at the university level, at the campus, who have got inquisitive mind, who are able to confidently engage in the discourse. If not, you will forever fail to do so because it's not the environment, the ecosystem is not there. So basically, that's my view. I'm a product of the University of New South Wales, Sydney, but I'm also a product of Royal Military College. So those were given to us. We were exposed to that sort of thing. And I likewise, probably you need more military college in this country, train them mentally and physically, but more importantly, look at the structure. Academic world, structure-wise, syllabus, amalan. That's why when you teach about religious, the faith and all that, all very good. The value system is very good. But these are the very value system that they transgress corruption, etc., etc. They were taught, these are all Muslims, some of them, and then it's not there, it's not embedded. It's not part and parcel of the amalan. So amalan, I give 0. Theoretical, high. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have much to say about that. Sorry, but it's because I think the whole discussion actually is requires about 6 months of webinars worth of this topic. So there's a lot of problems. It's not just the structure, and I also tend to think that parents themselves would appreciate if there is a policy of students who are told to wash the plates and the floors and dust the toilets and whatever. I think the communication, the link between the ministry, between policy and parents and society is not there. We have a very feudal mindset, which is we cannot overcome that. So I see what you're saying, and it's very legitimate. But on the other hand, there has to be a two-way street, and every corner aspect of society has to be in unison and be addressed. So it's not just get the ministry to do this. No, it's not just a top-down approach. It also has to come from the universities, and the mindset of the universities is horrendous. It has to change. We cannot solely blame the control that the ministry has over the universities. We also have to address the immorality or the lack of ethics among many people who value their promotion and their academic position more than contributing to society. This has nothing to do with ministry interference. So I think we've got to really dissect what the fundamental problems are. And this is not always associated with the ministry. It's basic, our ethos, how we look at what our worth is in society. Is it just about economics and finance and earning an amount to own a house and a car and be able to travel? And this applies to Australia, Japan, Denmark, every country in the world now, because the whole concept of education has changed.
Sharifah?
Yes.
This is Bakri Musa. Can you comment on your design of tests to encourage people to engage in critical thinking? What you are familiar in American campuses, we used to have open book and take-home tests, and that prevents you from regurgitating stuff that you've lectured in. Can you raise up? And the other point, that in most good American universities, by the time you graduate, you have written at least 30 to 40 standard essays, and that requires creative and critical thinking. Why do we encourage that for our students in Malaysia? That would be a good way to cut out regurgitation.
Hi, Bakri. I think I'm seeing you at the end of this month. Are we not on IRF?
Yes.
Thanks for
Thank you for the plug.
Yeah. Okay. You raised two very interesting issues, which I love to talk about, which is the open book test. Now, in terms of the essays you were referring to, are you referring to undergraduates or in high school?
Undergraduate and high school.
I see. Okay. All right. About the open book. Yes, I am a complete full supporter of that. And in Malaysia, there are many universities already practicing that. So I don't think this is a problem. It's just that we also have this problem of plagiarism. So we have open book tests, but we also have heavy plagiarism that goes along with it. and we can't depend on lecturers to call the students out when they themselves engage in such academic dishonesty. So while I'm all for open book, I conduct, as I mentioned in my previous comment, the way I assess students are differently. I assess them through their class participation. I give them a full-length essay, as well as several articles to review during the semester. So these are short. Some articles are just 6 pages long, some maybe 14. But I make them read the article and I make them critically analyze them. Now, of course, in the beginning of the semester, they don't understand that. But I have noticed they do learn. It takes patience, frustration, a lot of frustration on my part. But we have to be creative in the way we assess the students. Open book is one thing I would recommend in high school, in primary school, but along with that type of instruction, they have to be instructed why it is unethical to plagiarize. But, that's my answer, Bakri. Hope that's okay.
But our faculty members in Malaysia have access to these plagiarism software to detect people who get.
But who's going to use it when they themselves do it? So
Is there anyone else who would like to talk? Probably someone who's a student, maybe Melissa or Alisa, who would like to ask a question or voice out their opinions. Maybe they're shy.
Ataupun dalam bahasa Melayu pun boleh, ya, kalau mau tanya dalam bahasa Melayu.
Oh.
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Melissa sent a chat. Should I read it? Okay, so they said, my parents told me that you need to study hard, go to science stream, be a professional, and start a family. I have always wondered why would they tell me, because I disagree with them on that, and whenever I asked, they would give me unsatisfying answers I find mundane. But after asking the internet, and I finally realized that they didn't have the opportunity I had. That's what she said.
Yeah, is this from Melissa?
Yeah, this is from Melissa.
Yeah, Melissa, you are right, and you're facing the problem that many young people face. In fact, our generation also faces that. In fact, most parents always suggest and they strongly encourage their kids to go through a certain profession. It's not abnormal. It happens everywhere. The difference, though, is that some families or some parents don't end up forcing and being so strict that if you don't do so and such, we will disown you. It doesn't become that way. So I think to a certain extent, it exists everywhere. It's a very common practice of parents. We are guilty, all of us are guilty of it. I'm sure Senan is too. But if one forces you to go through to do the science stream, and you end up in secondary 4 or form 5, or I went through the Singapore system, so we go through secondary 4, and then there's pre-university 1 and 2. If by secondary 4, which is form 5, I think, you find out that you are not performing in science, the system, as was mentioned earlier, the structure in this system has to make it easy for these students to switch, to whatever other vocation they want to do. That kind of flexibility needs to be revisited, you see. And again, it involves the participation of all levels of society, including the universities, not just the ministry and parents, but this includes the universities, because even though it does not involve students who are already enrolled in university, it has an implication for university and higher education.
True. I kind of can relate with the one you said. Sometimes schools can be inaccessible in terms of allowing students to change their streams. And oftentimes for my school, they usually put you in classes according to your PT3 grades. So even if I didn't want to do science, because I did do well in science, they made me go into science class. And if someone wanted to change, it's a tedious process. They'll ask you, why do you want to change? Don't you want to stay in science? Do you know how good science is? Are you sure you want to move there?
Okay,
So then
let me interject here. I forgot to mention this. There is a very damaging mindset going around that has always been in existence, that if you are in science, you are more intelligent, you are highly intelligent. So those who go to the arts or the social science streams, it means they couldn't make it in science. Now, this mindset that science maybe leads to a good profession like being a doctor or an engineer who earns a lot of money. You see, it's always tied to that. Now, we've got to get on the bandwagon that we should de-link whatever discipline you study from the economics of it. We need to link it with nation building and society, which goes beyond economic value. So this is the point of my entire discussion with all of you. Just because you don't make it, I mean, even using that phrase, I didn't make it into science. I mean, nobody says I didn't make it into social science, so that's why I joined. You know, nobody says that. We've got to change that mentality. And trust me, philosophy is an extremely difficult subject to learn. Literature, language, linguistics, these are all humanities subjects. Extremely difficult. And if you are a professor of philosophy in a university in Dresden, for instance, you are worshipped like a god. You know, over here, you are chucked in the garbage bin because you're just a philosopher. What's the use? How much money can you make? So this mindset, again, Melissa, when you, Amira, when you grow up, have a family and have kids, I hope you remember today and teach your family, your children, about the wonders of the social sciences and humanities. And say, you know, darling, if you actually make it into science, it's okay. I will not hold it against you.
thank you, Melissa, for sharing that with us. Now, going back to what you said about students just studying just for the sake of studying, just to, get money. What can the university do to somehow revitalize the essence of education again? To set them up beyond just being marketable, to develop the human soul, to build a nation in that way.
Okay. Yeah, I think my last point, which I just mentioned, is part of the solution. It's to change that mindset about, or rather to change the link between your vocation, or rather the field of study with your economic worth. Okay. This human capital theory that we spoke of earlier, the modal insan, that students now are considered human capital, it has been so embedded that the only way is to start a discourse and keep drumming it into, and this kind of revamp is not going to take 5 years. It's probably going to take 15 to 20 years. So let's be aware of that reality. There's no quick fix to this mess that we are in. The mess created by ambitious politicians in the past. So there's no quick fix. It's going to take at least 20 years and not more. We've got to take the economic character out of this discourse. All right, so universities right now exist to serve the economy. They are in the business of creating job-seeking personalities. So you students out there are job-seeking personalities. That's your mindset. We have got to, on the other hand, to change this, we've got to push the philosophy of livelihood. Push the philosophy of life instead of the philosophy of livelihood. There's a subtle difference there. Instead of prioritizing the material aspects of life, we need to go beyond materialism to include humanity in this whole culture of academia that we are in the university. And again, I mentioned right in the beginning, what are we as academics or lecturers trying to make out of our students? We're trying to create a soulful, spiritual human being. I do not want to, I refuse to tell my students, you better get a 4.0 because you need to get that job. No. And I'm not going to teach them with that concept or that attitude. So, we ask ourselves, are we churning out human capital or human beings? I mean, that's quite a basic question. I think the last point, I need to reiterate this. There are good points about the West and about European universities and American universities that we need to emulate. And this is autonomy and the need to be able to intellectually express ourselves to our students and vice versa. As I said, we need to develop this mentality that the university must be neutral. Neutral meaning not to be manipulated by politicians, neither be manipulated by corporations or businesses. And that's why we need to relook at how we are so beholden to the world university ranking system. It's all about business. We also need to speak out about the business of publishing. That's a whole new discussion, but we need to acknowledge the fact that many universities in the developed countries are setting good examples that we have yet to follow. And this is one of it is autonomy. The second is we need to call out professors and lecturers in Malaysian universities who are not contributing to society. Whatever they write, whatever they speak, whatever they publish, or even when they teach, they do not bring a connection between theory and reality. Make your lectures relevant to daily life. I teach international relations. I constantly draw a parallel between realist theory and what is happening in the South China Sea, or why realist theory does not describe what is happening in the South China Sea. So, this is what I mean. Constantly connect the dots. And my last point, which I think real change requires reflection. Okay, if we are really unhappy with the state of affairs here, let's reflect, not just scream and shout to the media. And here in the back of my mind, I'm thinking of certain lawmakers and politicians and ex-politicians to remain nameless. Let's not scream at the top of our voice about how we have failed in our government policy because our education is crap. Let's truly reflect and be aware of the effort that all of us need to put into this. All the gatekeepers, okay? It's scholars, university administrators, politicians, students, and parents. We are all involved. We are all guilty of this mess up. But, you know, we need to put in the effort, do the work, sweat, toil, not just open your mouth and then that's it, because you want, you know, a few seconds of fame. That's all, Amira. I don't know if I've helped in this.
Can I ask just
Sharifah, can you?
Sorry. Go ahead. I can ask later.
Sharifah, can you comment on your early streaming in Malaysian schools? The greater issue there is not so much streaming as too early specialization. The average standard of English and the average standard of mathematics and science in Malaysian schools is at least 2 years behind that of modern countries, OPEC, OEC countries. So a Form 5 Malaysian student's general science is equivalent to Form 3 in Singapore. So isn't the question is not early streaming, rather to teach science, mathematics, literature throughout the school years instead of segregating science. In other words, science students must take literature, must take language, and art students must take science right up to Form 6. When I was in university, I had to take English literature in first year and philosophy. And that's even though I'm a pre-med student. So what comment on that at high school, early streaming?
Well, you know, early streaming, okay, there are a few points you brought up. First of all, the issue of language, okay, English, science and maths in English. I'm totally against this haphazard, you know, picking and choosing, plucking certain subjects and then saying, do it in English. I think that was an oversight by we know who did that. And I am all for our students, our kids to be bilingual. The dual language program is a perfect program that has to be pushed. Now, we are all talking about, you know, what is the meaning of a Malaysian? We're still at that level of debate about, you know, who are we? I mean, these are our big cosmological questions. What is the meaning of a Malaysian? You know, the problem is because we are bickering about language. Should we teach in Malay? Should we teach in English? Should we have vernacular schools or not? Okay, I'm not going to get into that, and I'm not an expert in the school system. Anything about the university, I might be more adept at. But getting back to your question about streaming, I think I'm all for what you and I have gone through, which is learning science and humanities and social sciences all at once together. I am not sure this streaming issue, if it was also inherited and part of the business model ethos that came out of the West. But Bakri, you may be able to explain that more. But in the Malaysian context, I think we are we should not be streamed because we already start so young, streaming and marginalizing or dismissing the very important humanities and social science subjects. What if when we get to the university level, we fall further back? Then when we have a role in society, even further back, because we cannot draw on the philosophy and the great thinkers on how to solve problems of humanity. So I don't know if that answered the question, Bakri.
Streaming is also another euphemism for labeling students. As you said earlier, you're science, you're smart, you're arts, you're not smart, and that labels carries on throughout your life.
Yeah, true. So I am quite stupid compared to Bakri.
Far from it.
You're a doctor, I'm just a social scientist. Just a joke, everyone.
Sir Sanan? Sir, your mic is muted.
Sorry. Thanks, Amir. Sorry, just a quick comment, Dr. Munirah. If you know what would you say to some ministry official now looking in on our, say, who was looking in on our discussion and saying, look, there is a problem. There is unemployment. They into skills and technical ability. What about this philosophy and all this? How does it solve our real problem?
Okay, thanks for that question, Senan, but I'm also aware that many of us researchers and who need to comment on this very serious problem also lack a lot of detailed and transparent data. So I will ask the minister or the politician who is asking me that question, be transparent about what is out there, allow us to go in depth and study this problem, which also probably includes sensitive issues of ethnicity, and then we can sit down and really tackle. But I will not be convinced that philosophy does not have a role. So that's my answer. It's a very good question, but it's also a question that depends, whose answer depends on the availability of data. And we all know, the economists in this country all know that there is a shortcoming in that area. So I don't know. I hope somebody asks me that question from the ministry, but engage me in a serious manner. If they really want to know if philosophy is worth it, engage some of us who really know about how it can help. I can, we can talk at length, but let's not dismiss something we don't know about.
I'm reminded of the American professor of philosophy at Kuwait, or Qatar, one of those places, Edward Moen. He's got a blog on it. He was asked to teach philosophy to the Arabic students. And then the vice chancellor said, you must use this text. The only problem is the text is an American text, totally unrelated to Arab students. So the Arab students end up regurgitating what American commentators have to say on the topics. So what he did was he asked the students to read local papers, local journals, local hikayats, and then comment on that. So after 2 years, he's got a textbook made specifically for Arab students. So that's what we need in Malaysia. Someone like you to read Hikayat, Munshi Abdullah, and all those people and analyze it critically and make that into a text at our schools instead of having critical thinking written by American professors who talk about, white supremacy, which is totally irrelevant in Malaysia.
Yeah, Bakri, good comment. And in fact, I have written published a recent article on Malaysian foreign policy. And I have critically analyzed some of our, like Sejarah Melayu and Hikayat Hang Tuah. And I have brought a discussion between certain concepts in the past and how they do not support or they do not agree with the current IR theoretical approaches and concepts. So I think there are a few of us doing that. But it's a passion of mine. I want, as soon as I retire, I'm going to completely get involved and engrossed in this.
Yes.
But there are hardly any fellow IR specialists in Malaysia that I've been able to communicate with. They're either non-existent or reluctant, not sure. But there are many in Indonesia, in the Philippines, in Thailand, and in fact, one or two in Vietnam. The region is vibrant in terms of this sort of intellectual activity. But Malaysia, at least in the public universities, it's dead. It's a graveyard.
Thank you, Dr. Bakri, for the input, and also Dr. Munirah, and also Susanan. We've learned a lot today. And since it's nearing 11, would Dr. Munirah or Susanan would say something before we end our discussion?
Sainan, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Thanks, Dr. Munirah. Thanks for coming. Thanks so much for coming. I'm glad it was a dialogue rather than a presentation. So that's my first comment. Because we have so few dialogues. We have so few dialogues. And even when you use the word dialogue, it ends up in a presentation. Yeah, so thank you so much for engaging us. Thank you, Amira, for sharing your experience as a student. Yeah, Melissa, Alisa. Yeah, I think some of you are from my human rights class last year or something. So thank you so much for Tan Sri. Thank you, Dr. Bakri. If we could, maybe. What I would end with is maybe if Munirah, you could lead us in this series of dialogues, that so the conversation, we sustain the conversation, especially with East Malaysia, yeah, because we are we are playing a game of our own here.
Yeah, yeah, Sena, that's a very good idea. You and I can talk more after this. A very informal monthly weekend kind of thing, or let's talk. But I'd like to say something. I want to congratulate Amira for doing such a great job. You have done extremely well, and I think this is beneficial. This style. A lot of you in the audience who are students may find this different. But if you notice, it's easygoing. It's we all feel like equals. I mean, this is my experience being in the United States for a long time. Everyone is treated as equals, but yet nobody is rude to the other. Here, we are afraid that if we treat each other as equals, the younger person is going to be rude to the older person. Or so we need to find common ground in that sense. So I really commend UMS for doing this, and Amira and Sainan in particular. Thank you, and I'm glad for everyone, including Bakri, your question, and Aziz, and everyone else. Sharia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in today.
Thank you, everyone. Okay. Okay. So we look forward to more conversations here. Thank you. Bye bye. Thanks, Amira.
Thank you, sir. Have a good day, everyone.